She stood at the corner of a busy street, singing softly into a toy microphone, lost in her own little world, blind to the rush and noise around her. She didn't see the cars, the people, or the towering buildings, but her voice reached someone. A billionaire, a man who lived in silence despite the noise of his wealth. He stopped, frozen, pulled by the sound of something real. What began as a random moment would slowly uncover a secret, ignite something unexplainable, and change the lives of 3 people forever. This isn't just a story, it's a turning point, a transformation. Before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to say hello. Now let's dive in. The morning rush in Manhattan was like a living, breathing machine. Horns blared, steam hissed up from sidewalk grates, heels clicked in rhythm with the city's heartbeat, but none of it touched Daniel Royce. At 40, he was the billionaire CEO of Royce Enterprises, a man who walked with the kind of calm that came from always being ahead. His suit, a light blue tailored piece, hinted at extreme wealth without screaming it. His dark hair, perfectly styled, stayed still even in the city breeze. Each time he lifted his wrist, his silver gray watch sparkled, a reminder that time to him wasn't just money, it was control, it was his kingdom. Every moment of his day was already claimed, calculated, spent in advance. He didn't walk. He moved with direction, slicing through the crowd like a knife. His mind was already juggling deals, future plans, mergers across oceans. He didn't pause for anyone. Detours weren't his thing. To Daniel, life was a game of power. Feelings, distractions, empathy, a weakness of the poor. But then, just as he turned onto West 57th, a sound slipped into the morning's harsh rhythm. It was gentle, unexpected, like a drop of honey falling into a bitter cup of coffee. He took another step. Then, another. Then, stopped. It wasn't the usual street noise, not the shouting or scratchy singing often heard from corners where buskers fought to be noticed. No, this was different. It was a child's voice, soft and high, but unbelievably clear. It flowed through the thick air like silk, gentle but strong. The song was unfamiliar, maybe even made up, but sung with so much soul, so much quiet beauty, it gave him chills. Daniel inhaled sharply. Something in his chest locked. He looked around, surprised. His feet, so loyal to routine, had disobeyed him. They had stopped. All around him, people rushed by, faces in phones, hands in the air, hailing cabs. No one noticing what he was hearing. But he noticed. And he felt it. It wasn't just a pretty voice. It was real. There was no act in it, no forced smiles, no polished tricks. Just pure, untouched emotion wrapped in song. It pulled on something inside him. Something he had forgotten he had. Daniel turned slowly, scanning the street. And then he saw her. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, stood beside an old lamppost. Her pink dress was as bright as cherry blossoms against the city's gray. She held a toy microphone in both hands. Plastic, decorated with fake jewels that caught the morning light like glittering stars. Her long brown curls danced around her shoulders as she swayed to music only she could hear. Her lips moved perfectly with the song. Each note she released floated upward, rising over the sound of footsteps, horns, and city chatter. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. Her voice was clear, honest. It filled the air with something fragile but powerful. Daniel stood frozen on the sidewalk. People had started gathering, forming a quiet half-circle around the girl. Some lifted phones. Others just watched. Their faces were calm, even emotional, like something inside them had been touched but they couldn't explain how. No one talked, no one shouted. There was a hush, like the whole street had stopped, breathing together. He stepped in closer. She wasn't like those trained child performers. No big movements, no artificial grins. Her song wasn't perfect, but it was real. There was something raw in it. The kind of sound that slides under your skin and shakes awake the parts of you you've locked away. As Daniel reached the front of the crowd, he noticed her head tilting, slightly upward. Her bright eyes didn't focus on anyone, they just floated above the audience, calm and still. Her face lit up with a quiet kind of joy, the kind that didn't come from being watched. She wasn't singing to impress. She was singing because her heart needed to, because something inside her refused to stay silent. And just like that, Daniel, the man who lived by numbers, who never paused even for sunsets, wasn't thinking about meetings or deals or power. He was just listening. When her last note faded into the air, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, gently, applause began. Soft, respectful. A few people wiped tears from their cheeks. Others smiled, not with politeness, but with something warmer, the kind of smile you give when someone comes home or says goodbye. But the little girl, Maddie Lane, didn't bow. She didn't wave. She simply smiled gently into the open air. Daniel blinked, unsure of why his chest felt so tight, like something old and forgotten inside him had suddenly woken up. He didn't know who she was, not yet, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He needed to find out. His feet moved forward on their own, like he was being pulled toward her by something he didn't understand. He hadn't planned to stop, hadn't planned to speak. But here he was, caught in her orbit. The city beat on around them, loud and fast. But none of it mattered anymore. Daniel crouched slowly, careful not to tower over her. Up close, she looked even smaller than he'd expected. There was a bit of dirt on her cheek. The bottom of her dress was frayed. Her shoes were worn and scuffed. And still, there was nothing sad about her. She had a quiet light in her, a kind of strength that was rare. "You have a beautiful voice," Daniel said softly, afraid to break the moment. "Really, it's amazing." She turned her head slightly toward his voice and smiled. "Thank you, sir," she replied politely, calm and gentle. Something shifted in Daniel's chest. Then, just as he was about to speak again, she said something that landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. "I'm sorry if I didn't look at you. I'm blind." The words weren't loud, they weren't dramatic, but they were impossible to ignore. Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't expected that. He'd thought her stillness was part of her performance. A kid lost in imagination. But now it all clicked into place. Her eyes hadn't followed him, because they couldn't. She hadn't seen him. And yet somehow she had seen through him, in a way almost no one ever had. There was no sadness in her voice, no hesitation, just plain honesty, spoken with a kind of peace that cracked something inside him. It wasn't meant to earn pity. It was just the truth. Nothing more. Daniel swallowed, his throat tight. "You don't need to be sorry for anything," he said quietly. "You sing like the world belongs to you." The girl giggled, a soft musical sound. "I like to think it does," she said, "even if I can't see it." He stared at her, stunned, not just by what she said, but by how easily she said it. She wasn't afraid of her blindness. She wasn't hiding from it. She was living past it, singing straight through it. She didn't just shine, she pulled people in. A little girl in a pink dress on a noisy Manhattan sidewalk, holding the city in stillness with nothing but her voice. And for the first time in years, Daniel Royce forgot everything else, the meetings, the deals, the pressure. All he could think about was her, this child who had stopped his entire world, and he wasn't ready to walk away, not now, maybe not ever. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft ding as Daniel stepped inside Millie's Bean and Bake, a warm, inviting place that felt miles away from the cold metal heartbeat of the city just outside. The smell of espresso and fresh pastries wrapped around him like a blanket he didn't know he'd needed. It was a modest cafe. Handwritten chalkboard menus hung behind the counter. Old bar stools lined the windows. Tiny jars with wilting flowers sat on each table. Worn but still trying, it wasn't fancy, but it had heart. Behind the counter, a woman in her early 30s was drying mugs with a towel. Her brown hair was tied in a messy bun. Faint dark circles under her eyes hinted at long nights and early mornings. She looked like someone who kept going because she had to, not because it was easy. When she looked up, Daniel froze. She had the same eyes, not just in color, that rare, almost translucent blue, but in something deeper. The same eyes that had stared right past him outside, the same ones that hadn't seen, but somehow had understood everything. "Hi there," she said, voice firm but not unfriendly. "What can I get you?" Daniel took a slow step closer. "Sorry to interrupt," he began. "I'm not here for coffee. My name is Daniel Royce. I just met your daughter, Maddie's, outside. I hope it's all right that I came in." Her shoulders stiffened slightly. The polite smile on her face wavered, just for a second, then returned like a mask put back in place. "Is she okay?" she asked quickly, the worry immediate, purely maternal. "She's more than okay," Daniel replied. "She's extraordinary. I was just walking by and I heard her sing. I've never heard anything like it. I don't even have the words." April Lane nodded slowly, but her body didn't relax. Her guard stayed up. "She loves to sing," she said softly, then added, "You said Daniel Royce?" He nodded again. Recognition flashed in her eyes. "As in, the Daniel Royce, CEO of Royce Capital?" Daniel gave a half-embarrassed smile. "Yeah, I guess the suit kind of gives it away." But instead of being impressed, her expression turned more guarded. "So, what does a billionaire want with a blind little girl singing on a street corner?" There it was. The raw reality. The weight in her voice. Daniel didn't flinch. He respected it. Most people sugarcoated things with him, played games, smiled, too wide. But April didn't have time for that. She didn't want charm. She wanted truth. "I don't want anything," Daniel said, and meant it. I had to meet the woman who raised her." April looked at him for a long second. Not with distrust this time, but with a kind of cautious curiosity. She put the tray of mugs down. Her expression softened just a little. "You really hurt her, didn't you?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I think she might be the first real thing I've heard in a long, long time." Something shifted then, in both of them. April didn't respond right away. She just kept her eyes on him, trying to figure out if there was a catch, a hook, a hidden offer, because in her world kindness never came without a cost. "You'll have to forgive me," she said at last. "But people like us, we don't get visits from people like you, not without a reason." Daniel nodded. He understood. "I get it, I do. I've spent my whole life building transactions. Everything has strings. But this, Maddie, this doesn't feel like one of those things. I just wanted to meet the person who gave the world a voice like hers." The air between them calmed. April's eyes dropped to the tray she'd been wiping. She didn't speak, but something in her face, something small, softened. "She's had a tough life," April said finally. "But she's never let it make her bitter. She doesn't complain, she doesn't cry, she just sings." Daniel felt the weight of those words hit him deeper than he expected. "I'm not here to offer charity," he said. "I just want to be someone who's around, if that's okay, even if it's just walking her home sometimes." April looked up at him again. There was still hesitation in her eyes, but less than before. Then, with a quiet nod, she said, "You can start by walking her home with me after my shift. You'll carry her backpack. She always packs too many books." Daniel smiled. Not the kind of smile he wore in boardrooms. A real one. "I'd be honored." And right there, in a tiny cafe filled with chipped mugs, warm scones, and cautious hearts, something new began. Quietly. Without contracts. Without expectations. Daniel Royce hadn't changed his schedule for anyone in over 10 years. His calendar was like a fortress, color-coded, minute by minute. His assistant once joked that he ran his life like a general commanding troops, and she wasn't wrong. Ever since that morning when Daniel heard Maddie Lane sing, something in him had quietly shifted. At first, it was subtle, like a whisper in the back of his mind. Then, all at once, it became impossible to ignore. What began as a small detour, a 5-minute stop at Millie's Bean and Bake before heading to the office, turned into something he didn't expect. He told himself it was just curiosity, just a break from his routine. But that wasn't the truth. 5 minutes became 20. 20 turned into 30. And by the end of the week, he found himself arriving earlier each day, just to catch Maddie's first song. She was always in the same spot, same corner, same worn-out toy microphone clutched in her hand. Her pink dress danced lightly in the morning breeze. Her long brown hair was always neatly brushed, and though her shoes were clearly old and scuffed, they were cleaned with care. She would tilt her head ever so slightly, listening to the city sounds, feeling the rhythm of the street the way others might check the weather. Daniel would stand just beyond the small crowd, never close enough to disturb, never far enough to ignore. He'd watch, and he'd listen. One morning, Maddie smiled and said, "You're back again, Mr. Daniel." He was caught off guard. She remembered him. "I guess I couldn't stay away," he replied, surprised by the truth in his own words. She giggled. "That means you're part of the routine now." And so he was. Every morning, Daniel met Maddie and her mother April after the songs. April remained polite, efficient, always just a little guarded. She'd nod while drying her hands on a towel, glancing at her watch like someone always balancing 100 things. Daniel didn't take it personally. He respected it. April was holding an entire world together by herself. In the beginning, she treated him like a figure from a dream, someone who didn't quite belong. She didn't trust him, but slowly that began to shift. On the third morning, she handed him a coffee to go, no questions asked. On the fifth, she called him by name, instead of sir. By the second week, Maddie had started to expect him. She'd wave her toy microphone in the air as he approached. "You missed the first song," she'd scold playfully. "Then you'll have to sing it again, just for me," he'd say, and she always would, and every time it felt like a gift. One morning, Maddie reached out and grabbed his hand without a word. Her fingers were small, warm, and surprisingly steady. "You're tall," she said, matter of fact, running her hand along his sleeve. "I am," Daniel answered, unsure what else to say. "Do you like being tall?" she asked. He laughed. "I've never thought about it." "I think it would be nice," she said. "You could see more." Daniel swallowed hard. She didn't say it with sadness. It wasn't jealousy, just curiosity, but the innocence of it hit him harder than he expected. April appeared moments later, her steps quick, her smile soft but tired. "Maddie, don't bother Mr. Royce," she said. "She's not bothering me," Daniel said gently. Before April could finish, April paused, then nodded. "I can't stop her from talking to people anyway. She's got her own rhythm." "I like her rhythm," he replied, and meant it. That evening, for the first time, April let him walk with them partway home. The walk was filled with Maddie's voice, painting the world the way she imagined it. "I think the buildings are silver," she said. "They sound tall, like they sparkle." She asked him about colors, how clouds moved, what cars looked like, what blue really felt like. Daniel found himself describing things he'd never described before, clumsy sometimes but always honest. He tried to paint pictures with words. She listened like every sentence mattered. April walked beside them, quiet and watchful. Daniel felt her caution, but she didn't stop him. And when he gently placed his hand on Maddie's shoulder at a crosswalk, April didn't say a word. When Maddie slipped her hand back into his, April smiled, just slightly. They reached their building just as the sun began to set. The brick walls were golden in the fading light. Daniel realized he'd driven past this part of town countless times, never once noticing how beautiful it was. On the stoop, Maddie turned to him. "Will you come again tomorrow?" Daniel didn't even hesitate. "Yes, I will." April looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Her voice was softer now. We're not used to people showing up. Not for long. I'm not most people, Daniel said quietly. She nodded slowly. I'm beginning to believe that. And then they disappeared inside, leaving Daniel on the sidewalk. Heart full. Watching the world he thought he knew shift and reshape. One little step, one small girl, one new routine at a time. The late spring sun slipped behind Manhattan's jagged skyline, painting the sky in streaks of amber and lavender. The sidewalks of Harlem glowed gently in the warm light. The city's noise had softened. Footsteps instead of engines, distant laughter instead of sirens. Daniel Royce walked with April and Maddie, just like he often did now. Hands in his pockets. His expensive shoes scuffed from too many detours through the neighborhood park. What started as a passing habit had turned into something else, deeper, unspoken, real. Each walk home didn't feel like an end to a day. It felt like a return to something he'd forgotten, to someone he'd lost, to a life he hadn't realized he was missing. That evening, Maddie skipped ahead, her long brown hair catching the last gold of the sun. She hummed softly, twirling her toy microphone like a magic wand. Every few steps she'd describe what she imagined they passed. A candy store made of clouds. A library where books whispered their secrets. A mailbox that only accepted songs. April watched her daughter with a fond smile, though her eyes still carried the weight of too many years lived with worry as a shadow. Daniel glanced at April when she wasn't looking. He saw the quiet strength in her steps, how she moved forward despite everything. She carried her life like a soldier but with grace, and he admired her more than words could say. Then Maddie slowed down. She fell back beside Daniel, reached out and gently took his hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his with quiet certainty, not like a child who needed help but like someone making sure he wouldn't drift too far. Daniel's heart jumped. She didn't look at him. She didn't stop walking. Her gaze stayed on whatever invisible horizon she saw. Then, in her soft, steady voice, she asked a question that stopped him cold. Did you used to be sad before you met me? He stumbled a little. Her words weren't innocent. They weren't guessing. They knew. She wasn't asking for fun. She was asking because she could feel it. Daniel looked down at her, his throat tightening. I think I forgot what it felt like. Not being sad, he said quietly. Until you reminded me. She nodded, like that answer made perfect sense. Sometimes I think people get lost, she said. Not on streets, but inside themselves. Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had stood before prime ministers, led empires, spoken to stadiums, yet nothing had ever left him so speechless. And how do you think they find their way back? He asked finally, his voice barely above a breath. Maddie shrugged, her hand still in his. Someone sings to them, she said simply, or holds their hand, like this. Daniel squeezed her fingers gently, not out of reflex, but to stay, in that moment a little longer. What he felt wasn't sadness anymore. It was peace, gratitude, maybe even a quiet flicker of joy. Up ahead, April had stopped at the corner to check her phone. A few strands of her hair caught the wind glowing golden in the streetlight. Daniel watched her, longer than he should have. There was something almost unreal about the way she stood there, tired but radiant. She wasn't defined by hardship. She was defined by how she faced it. As they caught up, Maddie let go of his hand and ran ahead, arms stretched like wings. I'm flying, she shouted. April slipped her phone back into her bag, smiling. She does that when she's happy. Daniel smiled too, eyes still on Maddie. She should always be flying. Daniel? April said. Then she really looked at him. Not just a glance, but something deeper. She never used to reach out to people like that. Daniel swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. April continued, her voice softer now. She's Opened up more since you've been around. I don't know what it is you're doing, but whatever it is, it's helping. Daniel couldn't find the words to describe what that meant to him. But somewhere between high-rise meetings and billion-dollar deals, he'd forgotten how to reach for people too. And now, a blind 6-year-old had reached for his hand, and in doing so, she'd quietly found his heart. That evening, as they reached the front steps of their building and said goodbye, Daniel turned to leave, but he paused. He looked back one last time. Maddie was on the stoop, waving, not wildly, not guessing, but waving toward the sound of his footsteps with confidence. She wasn't guessing. She knew where he was. And for the first time in years, Daniel Royce didn't feel lost. He felt. Daniel stood quietly in the hallway outside their apartment, his hand hovering mid-air before finally knocking. The hallway lights were dim. Only the soft whir of an elevator descending filled the silence. He had walked Maddie and April home many times now, but tonight felt different, because earlier that evening, at the bottom of the stairs, April had looked at him and asked gently, "Would you like to come in for tea?" That simple question had made his pulse skip. Now, as the door creaked open, warmth poured out like a quiet sigh. April stood there in a faded t-shirt and joggers, her blonde hair pulled up in a tired bun. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her face held something new, softer, still guarded, but no longer armored. "Come on in," she said, stepping aside. Daniel entered slowly, almost like he was stepping into something sacred. The apartment was small, clearly lived in, filled with a kind of cozy mess. Hand-drawn pictures were taped to the fridge. Bookshelves leaned under the weight of old stories. And in the air lingered a faint smell of cinnamon, the scent of comfort. Maddie sat in the corner, legs tucked under her, humming quietly as she built a tower from bright plastic blocks. Her head turned slightly when she heard her mom's steps, and she smiled when she heard Daniel's voice. "Hi, Mr. Daniel." "Hey, superstar," he said with a smile, bending slightly as he passed her. April motioned toward the small table near the kitchen. "Sit, I'll get the tea." Daniel pulled out a mismatched chair, suddenly aware of how out of place his tailored blazer felt in a room filled with heart. While April moved about the kitchen, he glanced around. The walls had cracks, the couch had pulled threads, but everything here was filled with intention, with care. It felt, real. April placed a steaming mug in front of him and took the seat across the table, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "You don't act like a billionaire," she said suddenly, meeting his eyes. Daniel blinked, caught off guard, and then chuckled quietly. "What's a billionaire supposed to act like?" April shrugged, detached, distracted, like there's always somewhere more important to be. He looked down into his tea, voice low. "I used to be like that. Until I met your daughter." Silence settled between them, heavy, but not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that happens when truth is hanging in the air, raw and unresolved. April's fingers tightened slightly around her mug. "You've been kind, Daniel. More than kind. But I need to ask, why? What do you really want from us?" Daniel looked up, her words cutting deep. "Nothing," he said firmly. "I don't want anything." He paused, trying to find the words. The first time I heard Maddie sing, something cracked open in me. I've spent most of my life untouchable, but her voice, it reached me. She reached me. April watched him, her eyes still tired, still cautious, but something in them slowly softened. "You're not the first person to feel something when she sings," she said, "but you're the first one who didn't just drop $1 and walk away." "I couldn't," he said. "I didn't want to." April nodded. "We're not rich, Daniel. We're not even stable half the time. I work 2 jobs. Rent's a nightmare. Her school isn't equipped for what she needs. But we make it work, we survive, and I'm proud of that." "I know you are," he said gently. "You've done something incredible. Maddie. She's extraordinary." "She is," April agreed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "But I've always worried people would see her as weak or broken." She's not. She's whole, even if the world doesn't know what to do with her. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I don't see her as fragile. I see her as the strongest person I've ever met. April's eyes shimmered. She blinked and looked away. She sees people, she whispered. In a way, most of us can't. Then, her voice dipped even lower. After that first day you met her and she told me something. She said, Mom, I think that man is carrying something heavy, but he doesn't know how to put it down. Daniel froze. His throat clenched. Of all the boardroom critiques and hard conversations he'd faced in life, nothing had hit him like that. He couldn't speak. Not yet. April slowly reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. Her touch was light, careful, but real. You don't have to carry it alone. Daniel stared at their hands. That simple touch felt like the most honest connection he'd had in years. No motives, no expectations, just kindness. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel Royce believed he might not be alone anymore. It had been nearly 2 months since Daniel first heard Maddie's voice, dancing through a Manhattan street. Since then, the sharp, cold edges of his structured life had softened. The world he once scheduled in color-coded blocks now bent easily around stories Maddie made up about colors she'd never seen, and the way April's laughter slipped out when she forgot to hold it back. Daniel had grown to care, not out of duty, but from a part of himself he thought had stopped working a long time ago. That afternoon they walked from Millie's Bean and Bake toward the little park where Maddie loved to sit and feel the sun on her face. Daniel kept glancing at her, her tiny hand wrapped around his, swinging freely as she balanced along the curb like it was a tightrope. April walked just ahead, checking her phone. But even her steps now moved in rhythm with theirs. They had unknowingly begun walking in sync. Hey, Maddie, Daniel said, casually, though a bit of tension edged his voice. Yeah? She answered, arms out like airplane wings, her toy microphone tucked under one arm. I've been thinking about your singing. She stopped, turning her head slightly toward him, curious as ever. I like singing, she said. I know, Daniel smiled, and I was thinking, what if more people got to hear you? On purpose this time. Not just by walking past. Maddie's brow furrowed slightly. Like, a concert? Exactly, Daniel said. Nothing big, nothing scary. Just a stage, some musicians, and people sitting quietly listening, really listening. I think they'd love it. I know I would. Ahead of them, April stopped and turned around. Her face already showed concern. A concert? She repeated, her tone cautious. Daniel, she's 6. She's never done anything like that. I don't know if she's ready. I want to try, Maddie said before her mother could say more. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. April blinked in surprise. Sweetheart, you don't have to. Say yes just to make someone happy, she said softly, crouching beside her. If it's too much, we don't have to. It's not to make someone else happy, Maddie said. It's to make me happy. Maddie nodded with quiet determination. I want to sing where people come just to listen, she said. Not by accident, on purpose. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. This little girl, the same one who once stood on a noisy street corner with a plastic toy microphone, now wanted to share her gift with the world. Not for attention, not for applause, but for meaning. Because she believed her voice could make people feel something real. April still looked unsure. Her hands gently reached up to fix Maddie's curls, her fingers trembling slightly. Only if you're sure, she whispered. I'm sure, Maddie said, gripping her mother's wrist. And you'll be there, right? April nodded, pressing a soft kiss to her daughter's forehead, every second. That evening, the 3 of them sat together on a wooden bench near the dog park. Daniel held a latte. Maddie slowly worked her way through a small cup of strawberry ice cream. As they watched the sky dim, Daniel explained the idea in more detail. It won't be flashy, he said. No reporters, no loudspeakers, No chaos. I'll handle everything myself. He turned toward April. I'll use a small venue, outdoors near Central Park. I'll make sure it feels magical, the right kind of magic, gentle magic. April narrowed her eyes at him. You've thought this through. I have, Daniel admitted, because it matters. She studied him silent for a few moments. You don't do anything halfway, do you? Daniel smiled softly. Not when it's important. Maddie leaned her head against his arm, her ice cream slowly melting in the cup. I want twinkle lights, she murmured. You'll have them, Daniel said immediately. White ones, soft ones, like stars. April let out a sigh. It wasn't frustration, it was surrender. Okay, she said. We'll try it. But if she gets scared, we stop. No questions asked. Of course, Daniel replied. And no exploitation, she added firmly. No cameras in her face, no scouts, no record labels knocking on our door. Daniel nodded. Nothing she doesn't want. Ever. They sat in silence for a while longer. The breeze was cool, brushing gently against their faces. Maddie hummed, lost in her own thoughts. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, letting her voice settle into the still places of his heart. That night, the concert stopped being an event in his mind. It became something else. A mission. He wasn't planning a debut. He was building a space. One where the world would stop and truly listen. And maybe, just maybe, he was preparing to listen too. For the very first time in his life, the sun had dipped low over Central Park, painting everything in soft amber light. Tucked just off the east meadow, under the trees, a small outdoor stage had been set. Folding chairs were placed in neat rows beneath strings of white lights swaying gently in the evening air. It wasn't a grand theater. It wasn't a sold-out show. But to Daniel Royce, it was perfect. This wasn't meant to impress. It was meant to be real. He stood quietly behind the stage, near the simple wooden platform that would serve as the spotlight, adjusting the collar of his suit. His eyes scanned the growing crowd, families, neighbors, curious strangers, people, drawn by whispers of a young girl with a voice that could touch the soul. There were no reporters, no chaos, just soft candlelight flickering and camera phones left in pockets. People weren't here to post. They were here to feel. Behind the curtain, Maddie Lane stood in her light blue dress, fingers gently wrapped around the microphone. Not her toy one. This was a real mic, matte black, wireless, balanced in her tiny hand like it had always belonged there. She wore simple white flats. A soft ribbon held her brown hair to one side, carefully pinned by her mother. Daniel knelt beside her. Nervous? He asked gently. Maddie tilted her head thoughtfully. A little, she said, but it feels like standing in the dark, with music, she smiled. That's not scary, that's home. Daniel couldn't find the words. His throat tightened. He reached out and squeezed her hand once, quick, reassuring. She nodded back, calm and certain. There was no host, no spotlight announcement. Just a slow hush spreading through the crowd, like ripples across still water. Then the lights above. The stage glowed softly, revealing Maddie standing alone in the center. The air changed. Stillness, expectation, a kind of quiet that held its breath. And then she sang. Her voice, just above a whisper, floated into the night like a breeze through trees. It was clear, unfiltered, completely unshaken. With each note, her voice grew, not louder but deeper, warmer, fuller, like sunlight through stained glass. She didn't move much, no big gestures, no rehearsed expressions. She just stood there, still, present, and let the melody flow from somewhere deep inside her. Backstage, Daniel stood frozen. He had heard her sing many times, on sidewalks, in cafes, during walks home. But this was different. This wasn't just music. It was truth. A quiet, honest truth given freely to a world too often full of noise. The audience didn't fidget. No one coughed. They were still, completely still, as Maddie sang them into a world of feeling. She sang about blue skies she'd never seen, colors she could only imagine, the warmth of her mother's hand, the rhythm of footsteps she'd learned by heart. It wasn't a song about being blind. It was a song about being alive. April stood near the edge of the stage, hands clasped tight against her chest. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Every note Maddie sang hit her like a wave, pride, heartbreak, wonder, all rolled into one moment. She felt her knees weaken but stayed grounded, unwilling to miss even a second. Then Maddie reached the final line. Her voice softened again, dropped into a delicate whisper. She held the last note, just a little longer than anyone expected. Her face tilted slightly upward, as if she were singing to the stars. Then came silence. 1 second. 2. A silence that didn't ask for clapping, only reverence. Then the crowd rose, not with roaring cheers, but with quiet awe. Some clapped with hands pressed to their hearts. Others simply stood, blinking away tears, not quite sure how to process what they'd just witnessed. It hadn't been a performance. It had been a gift, one that left everyone just a little more whole than before. Maddie gave a small bow, then turned and walked off the stage. Her steps were light, confident, as if she could see the path ahead, though Daniel knew she couldn't. Not yet. He and April met her at the edge. Daniel's eyes were wet. He didn't hide it. He looked at Maddie, this little girl in a ribbon and dress, and felt something ancient and sacred awaken inside him. "That was beautiful," he said, voice quiet. Maddie tilted her head as if listening to the shape of her voice still echoing in the air. "I think they felt it," she said softly. "I hope it made someone less lonely." April wrapped her in a hug so tight it made Maddie giggle. "You made the world feel something tonight," she whispered into her daughter's hair. As the lights dimmed and the chairs were packed away, Daniel stood beside them, hands in his pockets, his heart full. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because now he knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. By the time the folding chairs had been put away and the string lights unplugged, Daniel Royce thought nothing could make the evening more perfect. Maddie's performance, under the stars, in the quiet of Central Park, had been unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. It wasn't just beautiful. It had changed something. Even the silence after she sang had said more than any standing ovation ever could. It was like the world had stopped breathing, just to listen. Now Maddie had fallen asleep on a bench backstage. Her dress was wrinkled, her toy microphone clutched to her chest like a treasure. April sat beside her, gently brushing Maddie's hair away from her forehead with one hand, rubbing her own tired eyes with the other. Daniel stood a few steps away, giving them space. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. That's when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Nolan, his executive assistant. The man never texted this late unless it was serious. Daniel glanced at the screen, expecting a schedule mix-up or an urgent meeting request, but what he saw made him freeze. The performance clip's up. It's going viral. Already past 1 million views. Daniel stared at the screen. 1 million. It didn't feel real. The concert had only ended an hour ago. He tapped the link. The video loaded quickly. The thumbnail showed Maddie on stage, bathed in soft light, her mouth open mid-song, her eyes wide. The title read, "Blind Girl's Voice Leaves Crowd Breathless. You Need to Hear This." Daniel tapped play. The short 2-minute clip had been taken by someone from the event team using a handheld camera. The footage wasn't perfect, a little shaky, a bit dim, but none of that mattered, because Maddie's voice broke through, it all like sunlight breaking through heavy storm clouds. Even through a phone speaker, her emotion filled the space. In the comments below, responses poured in, one after another every second. "Who is she? I can't stop crying. This little girl just gave me hope again. I need to know more about her." Daniel kept scrolling, his heart racing. There were thousands of shares, tags, tweets, reposts. It was moving faster than he'd seen even his company's most successful campaigns travel. And yet, For the first time in his career, that usual thrill, that electric rush of going viral, didn't come. Instead, something heavier settled in his chest, something deeper. Responsibility. He looked over at Maddie, still asleep, curled peacefully under a blanket. She had no idea her world had just shifted. She didn't care about likes or shares or going viral. She sang because it made people feel something. She sang because it brought her joy. She wasn't ready for this flood. And he knew from experience, the world wasn't always kind when it wanted something. April noticed the way his face changed. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then handed her the phone. Someone from the crew recorded it. It's online, and it's everywhere. April's face paled. She rose slowly, careful not to wake Maddie, and took the phone from him. Her eyes moved across the screen, watching the numbers rise, the comments stack. She stared for a moment longer, then set her jaw. "They're going to try and take her," she said flatly. "They'll want to own her, use her, promise her the world, just to sell her voice." Daniel nodded. "Not if I can help it." He made 3 calls before leaving the venue. The first was to his legal team, instructing them to file immediate copyright protections and transfer video rights under his nonprofit, Voice in the Light, ensuring that Maddie's image and performance could never be used without full, clear consent. The second was to his head of cybersecurity. He wanted a full sweep to monitor Maddie and April's online footprint, prevent leaks, and protect them from invasive media attention. The third call was to his executive producer at Axon Group, the media wing of his company. He gave one clear order: no outreach, no offers, no business approaches to Maddie from anyone. "This isn't PR," he told them. "This is personal. Treat it like that." Later, as they packed up to leave, April carried Maddie in her arms, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Her eyes found Daniel's. "You still sure you want to be in this?" Daniel didn't flinch. More than ever. He followed them to the car, not just walking behind them, but standing between them and the world. He wasn't just shielding Maddie from the press. He was guarding something sacred. That same girl who once sang into a plastic toy mic on a street corner had cracked open the world. And now that the world had seen her, he'd make sure it never took more than she was ready to give. For Daniel, a man who used to measure life in deals and stock performance, this moment had become his new bottom line. This child, her voice, her light, and the family they were slowly becoming. As the car pulled into the quiet of night, the city lights flickering past, his phone buzzed again. 1,000,000 views. Daniel didn't check. Instead, he reached over and pulled the blanket gently over Maddie's shoulders. Tucked her in, protected her, not like a businessman, like a father. Let the world watch. He'd be the one holding the line. In the days that followed Maddie's performance, the world online buzzed with her name. They called her the blind angel of Central Park. But inside the cafe and inside the apartment in Harlem, life didn't change. April still woke up early to take her shifts at Millionaire's Bean and Bake. Maddie still sang into her toy microphone while doing her ABCs. And Daniel? He kept showing up. Not as a billionaire, not as a savior, but as a man who had found peace in their presence. Then one morning, a cream-colored envelope arrived at the cafe. It was addressed to April Lane, written in delicate, precise handwriting. The return address was from a pediatric ophthalmology clinic in Boston, one of the best in the country. April nearly dropped the tray of mugs in her hands when she saw it. Her fingers shook as she carefully opened it. She read the letter once, then again, then a third time. Slower. Each line pulled something deeper from her. Each sentence opened doors she had long kept locked. The ink on the page burned through years of closed-off dreams. It was from Dr. Amelia Novak, a leading specialist in retinal disorders and childhood blindness. She had seen Maddie's video, like millions of others. But unlike the rest, she saw more than a performance. She saw signs, In Maddie's voice she recognized not only the emotion but the sharpness of understanding, the depth of sensory awareness. And through discrete connections she had accessed Maddie's medical file. The letter said something April hadn't let herself imagine in years. There was a chance, however small, that Maddie's vision could be partially, or even fully, restored. It wasn't a miracle. It was science, gene therapy, retinal implants, a procedure still in early stages but showing success in children who matched Maddie's profile. The odds weren't great, less than 30%, but they weren't zero. April sat in the back of the cafe, the letter resting in her hands, a cold coffee untouched on the table. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just stared, as if breathing too loudly might make the hope disappear. Later that day, when Daniel arrived like always, he found her still sitting in the same spot. She looked up, eyes glassy, hands still holding the paper like it was something sacred. "I want you to read something," she said softly, passing the letter to him. Daniel took it with care, already understanding by the tone in her voice that it was something heavy. He read it slowly, his usual unreadable business face beginning to shift, his brows pulled together, his mouth pressed tight. By the time he finished, he looked up at her with a mixture of hope and fear. "She's already so strong," April whispered, her voice shaking. "What if we do this and it changes her? What if she loses that light inside?" Daniel folded the letter carefully like it was something holy. "And what if it works?" he said quietly. "What if she sees you for the first time, sees the world she's only sung about?" April let out a breath that sounded like part laugh, part sob. "You don't get it. I let go of this dream a long time ago. Hope. It hurts. It's too dangerous when it's taken away." Daniel leaned closer, voice full of quiet emotion. "I've spent my life betting on long odds, most of them worse than this, and none of them ever mattered this much. But this matters." He paused. "If there's even a small chance, shouldn't we take it?" April didn't answer. She just stared back down at the letter, the page that now held a possibility she couldn't yet wrap her heart around. But slowly, she shifted, not away from it, toward it. That night, Maddie sat on the rug at home, humming softly as she built a tower from wooden blocks. April sat nearby, watching her child with awe. That little girl who had never once begged, never once complained. She had always deserved more. And now, maybe, just maybe, she might finally see it. 2 weeks later, Daniel's private team had arranged everything. They boarded a quiet flight to Boston, the three of them together. He had reserved a peaceful suite at a nearby family lodge, a space filled with sunlight, soft blankets, and the calming scent of lavender. The night before the surgery, April couldn't sleep. She stood by the window staring into the stillness while Maddie rested quietly in the next room. Daniel came to stand beside her in the silence. "What if this changes everything?" she whispered, and Daniel answered quietly. "Then let it," he said, "as long as it's for her." They stood in the soft dark of the Boston night, clouds covering most of the stars, yet something sacred shining between them. Two people who never imagined a shared future, now standing side by side, ready to leap for the sake of a little girl who had already changed their lives in ways no miracle ever had. Inside the hospital, the halls were still and quiet as dawn approached. The sterile blue glow of the early morning lights reflected off the white floors. April sat in a hard plastic chair, her back stiff, hands tight in her lap, eyes locked on the recovery room door. Daniel stood at the window, arms crossed, staring out at the city slowly waking up. The skyline shimmered in the glass, but his thoughts weren't there. It had been 4 days since the surgery. 4 days of cautious hope. 4 days of silent prayers neither of them dared to speak out loud. The doctors had explained the healing would take time, even if it worked. Maddie would need to relearn how to understand what she saw. It wasn't certain, nothing was. But still, there was hope. And somehow, that was even more terrifying than despair. A soft knock pulled them out of their thoughts. Dr. Levin, the lead surgeon, stepped in quietly, his expression calm and gentle. "We're ready," he said. "It's time to remove the bandages." April's heart started to race. She stood up too fast and had to grip the side of the chair to steady herself. Daniel was already moving toward the room. Inside, Maddie lay still, wrapped in thin hospital blankets. Her head rested gently on the pillow. She looked peaceful, but her body held a quiet tension, like she was waiting to meet a world she'd only ever imagined. The nurses dimmed the lights. April sat beside her, taking Maddie's right hand. Daniel reached for her left. Without needing to see them, Maddie's small fingers curled into theirs. "You're here," she whispered. "I told you I would be," Daniel said, his voice soft as breath. The nurse began unwrapping the layers, one by one. Time seemed to stretch, each layer coming off slower than the last. The only sounds were the soft beeping of machines and the rhythm of breathing in the room. As the final piece of gauze was lifted, Maddie blinked slowly. Once, twice. Her eyes, once cloudy and still, began to move. Focused, searching. She blinked again, trying to make sense of the dim room. Her pupils reacted. Her gaze darted gently. Then her eyes caught the glow of the overhead light. She flinched, startled, but adjusted. "Mom?" she said, her voice fragile. April gasped, one hand rising to cover her mouth. "I'm here, baby," she said, stepping closer. "I'm right here." Maddie turned her head toward the sound. Her eyes narrowed, focused, struggling, and then settling. A few seconds passed in silence. Then Maddie spoke again. "I see you," she said. The words cracked with awe, barely holding together under the weight of wonder. "Mom, I see you." April collapsed gently onto the bed, her hands cradling Maddie's face. Her fingers trembled as she kissed her daughter's forehead again and again, tears pouring down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "To the doctors, to the universe, to Daniel, to every unseen force that had carried them here." Daniel stepped back, breath caught in his throat. He had once stood before presidents, sat at the head of billion-dollar negotiation, and never felt what he felt now. This moment brought him to his knees on the inside. Maddie turned her head again, slower this time, and her eyes found him. At first unsure, still adjusting, then steadier, brighter. "You look kind," she said softly, smiling. "Your voice is warmer than your face, but I like both." Daniel let out a deep, surprised laugh, the kind that rises from places long forgotten. He knelt beside her, still holding her hand. "I've been waiting to see you see," he whispered, eyes damp. "And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed." Maddie beamed, squeezing his hand. "You were the first thing I saw clearly, you know," she said. "That's pretty cool." April placed her hand on Daniel's arm, anchoring them all in the moment. The doctor stepped back quietly. The nurse slipped out of the room, leaving behind not a hospital silence, but a sacred hush. In that room, beneath soft light and the steady rhythm of Maddie's heart monitor, 3 people sat together, wrapped in a new beginning. Not a perfect one, not a story's end, but a turning point. Because when Maddie opened her eyes, all of them began to see differently, with sight, with love, with everything they had once held back. And for the first time in her life, Maddie Lane saw the world she had only sung about, and it was brighter than she ever imagined. Daniel remained in the room for a long while, watching April hold Maddie gently in her arms. The discarded gauze sat in a bin nearby, meaningless now. All that mattered was the light shining in Maddie's gaze, the way her eyes moved across the room like they were discovering magic. "Mom, I see you." Those 4 words stayed with Daniel long after they left her lips. He had built skyscrapers, commanded boardrooms, changed industries. but nothing had ever moved him like that. He stayed silent, letting her eyes take in everything his once had, and more. Later, after the excitement quieted, Daniel and April walked side by side through the hospital's quiet corridors. April's hand traced the wall beside her, as though grounding herself. "She looked at me," she whispered. "For the first time, she really looked at me." Daniel nodded slowly, too moved to speak. That night, they returned to the small lodge suite the clinic had provided, a space tucked away from a world now buzzing with Maddie's name. She had fallen asleep quickly, exhaustion claiming her body after everything. She lay curled under a blanket, one hand under her cheek, the other wrapped around her toy microphone like it was part of her story. Daniel sat on the couch, his hands locked between his knees. April sat across from him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then April broke the silence. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think it would hurt less if I didn't hope, that if I let go of the dream, I wouldn't be disappointed." Daniel looked up. "But you never really let go." April held his eyes. "No, because a part of me still believed the world might have room for miracles." Daniel stood and went to the kitchen. He poured 2 mugs of tea, something grounding in the rhythm of it. When he handed her the mug, she took it with both hands. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "about everything." April raised a brow. "That's a lot of everything." Daniel smiled softly. "It is, but my thoughts always go back to that apartment of yours. Maddie's stars taped to the fridge, the smell of cinnamon, us on the floor after dinner. That's where life started making sense again." April blinked. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I don't want to be a visitor anymore," he said, quieter than before. "I don't want to go back to cold penthouses and hollow meetings. I want mornings with her voice, nights making dinner. I want us." April didn't answer with words. She stood, crossed the room, and took his hand. "I don't need a savior, Daniel," she said. "And Maddie doesn't need a hero. But we both need someone who stays." Daniel didn't hesitate. "I will if you'll let me. I'll stay." The next day they returned to New York, but Daniel never went back to his tower. Instead, he followed them home, to the small Harlem apartment. The doorman at his building would later tell others that Daniel never came back. Only once to collect a few personal boxes. He started staying with April and Maddie, at first just for dinner, then overnight. He took the couch, a quiet presence, respectful, steady. Maddie would often wake early and tiptoe into the living room. She'd tap his forehead and whisper, "Time for the real world, Daniel." One evening, as the sky turned orange behind the Harlem rooftops, Daniel stood in the doorway holding a small box. April looked up. "What's that?" He handed it to her without speaking. Inside was a key. "I bought a townhouse," he said. "Just a few blocks from here. 3 bedrooms, a little yard, close to Maddie's school, close to the cafe. It's not big, not flashy, but it's ours, if you want it." April stared at him, her eyes filling. "You did all that without asking?" Daniel's smile was soft. It didn't feel like a decision, it felt like the next step. She didn't respond. She kissed him instead. Gently. Fully. Finally. Weeks later, they moved into the new house. Maddie ran through every room laughing, claiming each one like it had always belonged to her. And on the very first night in that home, just before the sun came up, Maddie climbed into their bed, nestled between them, and whispered, "Now we're really a we." Neither Daniel nor April spoke. They didn't need to. They just held her close and then never let go. And he held on, even as the sun slowly rose over a family that had never been planned, but somehow had always been meant to be. Daniel Royce stood quietly at the edge of their small kitchen, watching April Lane chop vegetables with the kind of quiet grace that came from routine and love. Morning sunlight poured through the window, catching strands of her hair and spreading gold across the countertop. Maddie, now 7, sat cross-legged at the dining table, humming softly while she colored a page from her new book. A picture of a park filled with balloons and children playing under trees. Their home, a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse near Maddie's school in Upper Manhattan, was nothing like Daniel's former penthouse in Midtown. But to him, this place felt more like home than any mansion or skyline suite ever had. He hadn't made any grand announcement when he sold the top floor of that skyscraper. No headlines, no press. He had simply handed over the keys to his real estate team and quietly bought this place. A house with uneven floors, chipped corners, and a kind of warmth that couldn't be designed. April had found out by accident one morning. She'd noticed a pair of unfamiliar keys hanging on a little hook by the door and turned to him with a curious smile. "Is that what I think it is?" Daniel had nodded. "It's home, if you want it to be." They moved in later that spring. No moving trucks, no flashy furniture. Most of what filled the house already belonged to April, worn, loved, and full of stories. Daniel didn't bring much, just himself, and a quiet desire to finally build something real. Slowly, the house transformed. The walls filled with framed drawings Maddie made, pictures from their walks in Central Park, a snapshot of her very first performance. The kitchen was always stocked with her favorite yogurt, and by the door, her old toy microphone sat proudly, on a shelf beside a new real one, sleek silver, a birthday gift from Daniel. He had never pictured this life. He used to measure success in stock surges and global mergers. Now, success looked like Maddie calling from the other room, "Daniel, can you help with my zipper?" Or April falling asleep mid-sentence while reading, her head gently resting on his shoulder. He even learned how to braid Maddie's hair on Sundays. It wasn't neat, his fingers were clumsy, but she always wore it proudly and called it her CEO braid. April teased him about it. He teased her right back, and their laughter became the soundtrack of the home they were growing together. Maddie was thriving. She went to therapy 3 times a week to help her brain adapt to seeing, to process the world that used to be just sound and imagination. She stayed patient, curious, soaking up everything around her like a sponge. Her therapists often said her resilience was beyond her years. She asked questions that stuck in your heart. One morning, while Daniel drove her to an appointment, she looked out the window and asked, "Why does everything move so fast even when people look so tired?" Daniel hadn't known how to answer. But he carried her question with him all day, and he changed too. Slowly, quietly. His work hours shrank. His phone rang less. He stopped answering emails after 8 p.m., and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel guilty about it. He found meaning in the simple moments, grocery shopping with April, building IKEA bookshelves with Maddie, while she gave overly serious instructions from the floor, falling asleep on the couch during cartoons none of them really understood. One Friday evening, just as spring melted into summer, Daniel shared a surprise. He had helped organize a community concert, an outdoor event meant to support children with visual impairments. There would be music, art, and scholarships funded through the new nonprofit he had started, Voice in the Light, named after the video that first introduced Maddie to the world. When he told Maddie, her eyes widened. "Do I get to sing again?" she asked, her voice soft and unsure, but full of hope. "Only if you want to," Daniel said gently. She paused, looked out the window, then turned back to him. "I want to sing, but this time, I want to sing for all the kids who can't find the light yet." Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded slowly, blinking past the tears threatening to rise. That night, Maddie snuggled between them in bed, her little hand resting on Daniel's chest, the other held gently in April's. She yawned, then whispered, "Now we're really a we. Like a real family." Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Daniel pulled her in a little closer. April leaned in against him, and in that quiet space, wrapped in shared warmth, they all finally felt what it meant to belong. Not because they had saved Maddie, but because they had built something with her, a future, a family, a forever. The summer evening was soft and golden as Daniel stood backstage, one hand resting on Maddie's shoulder. She stood tall in a sky blue dress she'd picked herself, her favorite color now that she could finally see it. Her long brown hair was clipped to the side with a small pearl barrette, a gift from April. In her hand, she held a real microphone, not the toy one she once used on a street corner. Sleek, black, just the right size for her grip. Across the grassy field, families gathered beneath trees strung with lanterns. Children ran between rows of folding chairs. Parents chatted softly. Some were strangers, others were part of the new foundation. But all had come because of the story that began with Maddie. Voice in the Light, born from her first song, now offered music programs and therapy for kids with vision challenges. This concert was their first big event. But for Daniel, it was never just an event. It was personal. April stood just off stage in a simple navy dress, her hands gently clasped, her eyes fixed on Maddie like she was her North Star. Even after everything, it still amazed her. Her daughter, standing here, seeing, smiling, unafraid. Daniel leaned down slightly. "Are you ready?" Maddie nodded, calm as ever, her eyes scanning the stage ahead. "I'm not just singing tonight," she whispered. "I'm thanking the world." As she stepped into the stage lights, the entire field fell silent. Even the breeze seemed to pause. There was no host, no introduction, no big announcement. Just Maddie Lane, 7 years old, standing in the soft glow of twilight. She lifted the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and smiled. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was true. And it carried like music made from light. She sang about what light had meant before she could see, what it meant now. She sang about color, about the sound of her mother's laugh, about Daniel's face, and how it wasn't nearly as serious as his voice made it seem. Her words were simple, but her voice was full of something deeper, richer than before. A sound shaped by all she had lived through. She wasn't performing, she was telling the story of who she had become. When the final note faded, no one moved. The crowd stayed still, suspended in that sacred moment. Then slowly, the standing ovation began, not loud, not wild, but reverent. People wiped tears. Others simply placed their hands over their hearts, unsure how else to respond. April stood frozen, one hand over her mouth, the other clutching Daniel's. She didn't need to speak. Her tears said everything. Maddie stepped down and walked straight. Into their arms, her face glowed, not from the lights, but from peace. "Did I do okay?" she asked, blinking up at them. April dropped to her knees and pulled her daughter close. "You did more than okay, baby," she whispered. "You moved the sky." Daniel crouched beside them, gently placing his hands on Maddie's cheeks. "I've never been prouder of anything in my entire life," he said, voice thick with emotion. Maddie smiled. "I just wanted people to feel seen," she said softly. Later that night, after the chairs were folded, the sound crew packed up and only stars remained. The three of them walked home together. Maddie in the middle, her hands in theirs. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels personal. "I think I want to be a teacher one day," Maddie said suddenly. "Or maybe a mom. Or maybe someone who helps kids not be scared when things get dark." April smiled. "You can be all of those things, sweetheart." Daniel nodded. "Whatever you decide, we'll be behind you, always." Maddie squeezed their hands. "You know what I like best?" she asked. "When I call you Mom and Dad, it feels right. Like it was always supposed to be that way." Neither of them replied. They didn't have to. They just tightened their grip on her hands, walking forward under the stars, their shadows long and joined as one. And though the city around them kept moving, busy, noisy, distracted, it no longer felt like something to conquer. It felt like something they could finally share. Not as a billionaire, a single mother, and a once blind girl, but as a future, a family, a forever. We'd love to know what this story meant to you. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. If this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking the end screen now.